One of the things I have noticed over the years is the dynamic that goes on between all of us and the things we read and hear about, the things we feel like we're supposed to do in order to demonstrate that we're making progress on the spiritual path. And one of the things that comes up frequently is the idea of forgiveness. I am supposed to be a forgiving person. And if I don't feel so forgiving sometimes, I question my own spiritual integrity. And I'll work on it. And one thing that I think we have to be aware of, and we can start today, is forget everything that you think you should be doing as a spiritual being. Forget everything you've been told and figure out for yourself whether or not it's right, whether or not it's true. And if forgiveness is something that we should be doing because Jesus said it or because somebody said it, why? Why should we be doing this? What is the spiritual principle behind forgiveness? Exactly what is it? And that's what we're going to look at today, which you may wonder, why is there a bag connected to this talk? And I'll get to that in just a moment. I really like what Peter Russell says in his book, From Science to God. He is a physicist that is also very much on the Eastern path and is a pretty enlightened being. Made himself known some years ago with The Global Mind, I think was the name of the book, something like that, about the advent of the computer age and how we're all going to be connected and all that. And he says now that's no longer valid. We're all connected, but we're not any more evolved. So we just know we're not evolved now because we all communicate with each other. But the internet is not a solution to raising human consciousness, and that's another myth that we think has to happen before we can experience, the peace that we're seeking. We don't have to wait for our neighbor. We don't have to wait for the rest of the world to tap into omnipresence. We've never been separate from God, never will be, can't be, except in our thinking. And so a lot of the things that we accept because they are popular, because they've been embraced by so many people, we're riding on a bandwagon that we don't necessarily understand. And that's part of the spiritual journey, is responsibility, self-responsibility. Understand why it is you are supposed to do something. If I'm supposed to be forgiving, why is that? So Peter Russell points out that the conventional understanding of forgiveness, the one that probably most of us carry, is of an absolution or pardon. I know you did wrong, but I'll overlook it this time. That's kind of the attitude that we are not supposed to hold grudges or bad feelings toward another person. He says, but the original meaning of forgiveness is very different. The ancient Greek word for forgiveness is aphios, I think is how you say it, meaning to let go. So that's a very different meaning from the idea of you've done me wrong and I'm going to muster the strength to forgive you for doing that. To let go takes a very different approach. And it takes a different approach because the only experience you can have with another person is actually not with that person. It is with your perception of that person. And you can prove that by reminding yourself at this moment of someone who makes you very angry. Maybe you don't have anybody, somebody that just kind of gets under your skin. You can think of them right now, and they could be 2,000 miles away. And the more you think about them, the more under your skin they can get. So where are they? Where do they exist? Where is your relationship with that person? So the original meaning of letting go begins to make sense. Maybe they did do you wrong, but what experience are you having the moment you are thinking about them? What is happening to the quality of your life the moment you are engaged in thinking about them in maybe a negative way? So when we think about letting go, do we think of that person and whatever they did to us is okay, and we'll rise to a large enough place in ourselves where we can overcome that? Or are we talking about letting go of the energy that we're generating as we think about them? Sometimes it is very difficult to forgive the actions of another in the classical sense of the word, where what they did is very difficult for us to deal with, and it's just hard to get past that. And I can say I forgive you, but still I carry that energy of non-forgiveness. It's a little like Mark Twain talking about an editor that messed him around in one of his books, and he died. And Mark Twain said, I did finally forgive him, and if I could, I'd send him a fan. Meaning he's burning in hell, so that's not exactly forgiveness, and he was, he said it because he understood what he was saying. I had a class one time, we were talking about hell and how it was really something that we've conjured up. It's not a place down in the belly of the earth. And this woman raised her hand, and she was very angry about an ex-husband that she had, and she's just very adamantly said, there needs to be a hell. So she was taking that approach too, that he did something apparently that, and I didn't question what that was, but it must have been pretty severe for her to need a hell for him. But it is this idea that somehow we need to reconcile the actions of another, or somehow overlook, or maybe even get to the point where it just doesn't bother us that they are who they are and all of that. But if you think of it more as we carry those people around with us all the time, they are energy in our consciousness. So if you think of the forgiveness act as just dealing with that energy, letting that go, try as much as you possibly can to forget the person. Take the personality out of it as much as you can. And let that energy dissolve. Otherwise, we stay basically on the same level. There's a story of a married couple that was living in a very small apartment. They got into a horrific argument. So much so that they didn't speak to each other for 3 days. Some of you know that drill, I'm sure. Well, the man remembered he had a business trip. He had to catch a plane at like 7 a.m. And he depended always on his wife to wake him up. But they weren't speaking to each other. So he had a problem. So he thought about it for a while, and how am I going to get her to do this without talking to her? So he wrote a note. Important meeting tomorrow. Wake me up at 5. He laid the note on her pillow. He went to bed. He was totally peaceful because he solved his problem. So he wakes up the next morning. It's 8. He freaks out. He can hear her singing in the bathroom. He starts to tear out of bed, and he looks on his nightstand, and there's a note. It says, it's 5 o'clock, time to get up. So the approach we take sometimes is kind of like that. It doesn't really resolve anything. We're operating on the same level. When we're trying our hardest to forgive. If you're trying to forgive, you're not forgiving. You are dealing with the issue at a level you can't deal with. You can't let it go. It is easier to think of the energy that you're going through. Don't think of the action. Don't think of the reason that you think you're supposed to forgive them. And try to justify all that. That's an intellectual approach. If you think of yourself as a complete soul, you're already complete, and yet you're having this miserable experience, this reaction. What is that? What is standing between yourself as a complete soul and the freedom that you know can be yours? And the answer always is not another person. And that's hard to get sometimes. In fact, it's hard to get every time. That's why we have these reactions. But what you have there, the opportunity you have, the thing that stands between your wholeness, your complete soul, and your current experience, is this energy that you are allowing to well up. And so that's where we let go. And that's where the bag begins to make sense. I put these things up on Facebook. I've been doing it for a couple of weeks now, just to show our presence there, and is a kind of an inspirational thing. But one I put up the other day was, forgiveness is the choice to leave behind a bit of baggage that no longer serves your highest good. So you think of yourself as a complete soul, and yet going through this thing, this problem. Your ex-husband needs to go to hell, and you don't know how to deal with that for sure. Well, that's all energy. You can't do anything about another person, the actions of another person. We're not in control of that. But we are in control of the energy that rises up and stands between ourselves and the peace of mind we could be experiencing. We can do something about that, and that's forgiveness. That is letting go. And it depersonalizes the thing that we feel like we have to do. Because when I think of forgiveness, I always think I have to forgive you. There's a personality attached to it. If I say instead, my job is to let go of the energy of which you are a part, at least your image is a part. You are taking place inside of me, in my consciousness. And so I can let that go. I do have that ability. There's nothing, as I say in my book, The Complete Soul, there are no natural barriers that stand between our personal awareness and our complete soul. But there are plenty of unnatural barriers. And the area of relationships probably provides us with the most unnatural barriers. I think human relationships are they're very beautiful, and they can be very challenging. But when somebody does something and we're mulling over what that is, we don't like what they did, and we wish they hadn't done it, or we wish they would apologize or whatever, and they're not going to, and maybe they felt totally justified. We can't change that. So forgiveness then would be release the energy, and it may take some practice doing that. I know it does. We all have people in our lives that we need to let go of, I shouldn't say need to, we don't have to do that. And that's another thing that will let off some of the pressure. You don't have to be forgiven. You don't have to. Your soul is going to be okay no matter what you do. You can go through this life as the most miserable person imaginable, and your soul will be okay. So let's get rid of that thought that we can do something to damage our spiritual experience, because we can't. We can sure feel like we have, and we can be totally miserable here. But if we accept this idea that there are no natural barriers between my awareness now and the condition of my soul and my soul's full expression, then I can say, okay, this is not a person, this is energy. This is a thought, this is an emotion. I can't stop the bird from flying over my head, as the Chinese proverb says, but I can stop it from building the nest in my hair. And that's the thought, the energy that is floating around there. That's what is destroying my quality of life. Not what you did, but what I'm doing. And I can release that. I can let that go. Because we can say that doesn't mean it's easy, and that goes without saying. It's not always easy. But I would go a step further and say it's easier than not doing it. Have you ever been angry at somebody for many years? Carried something against someone for many years? If you've done that, it's not a pleasant experience. I've done it. I've carried people for many years. There's the story of the two monks that were walking along the path and come to a river, and there's a woman. Did I tell this? I'll tell it again. Woman on the bank, and she needed to get across, and one of the monks picked her up on his back, and the monks were not supposed to do that. The other monk didn't say anything, but they crossed the river, he put the woman down, and they went on their way, and many hours later they reached their destination. The monk that didn't carry the woman said, I need to talk about this a little bit. We're not supposed to pick up women. We're not supposed to do what you just did. And he said, I picked her up and carried her across the river, and I set her down. But you're still carrying her. You get it? Do I have to explain that? Is it? So where is the offense? It's in the thought, emotion, experience. The monk that did not carry the woman had the problem. He had the need to release. The other one released her the moment he set her down. But it's easy to carry things like this for years, and we don't really know what impact that has. But let's not deal with that because we're supposed to or because we have to. Let's deal with it because we understand why. We understand what's going on, what's blocking our quality of life, and what is it we can do about it. There are those who are quick to suggest reconciliation is the right and spiritual thing to do. I have found, however, that letting go is the better way. Those who have sought to inflict harm once are usually repeat offenders. I have probably had more encounters. Well, I've been in ministry for so long that that's where most of my life has taken place. And I've had a lot of issues with people. We had one recently where a group of 10 or so people left, angry, and went off to start another church. That's happened in every church I've been in. And it's just, in some ways, a sad thing to see, but there's always someone that will say, well, why don't you call them up and, throw your arms around them and forgive them and do all the stuff you're supposed to do, the stuff you teach. Well, I don't teach that. And I especially don't teach it after the experience I've had in all these years. Because if someone is capable of inflicting that kind of harm on you, you will walk on eggshells with them forever. But you're going to offend them again. There's going to be a time when you offend them again. You don't live your life based on your fear of what they might do. One person that brought this up one time, I knew was divorced, and I said, I have done quite a bit of counseling and in marriages and so forth. Why don't you give your ex-wife a call? The three of us will meet in my office and we'll work it out. He said, there's no way. I said, well, why do you expect me to do it? It's the same thing. We don't always get along, and we don't have to. We're not always on the same page. Sometimes we walk for years in agreement, and then we can part company in disagreement. Is that a bad thing? It's only bad if we don't let it go. It's only bad if we are unable to forgive in the sense that we're talking about here. Release that energy. I have plenty of reasons to carry people over the years in my consciousness through ministry and so forth. Nobody ever taught us that in seminary, that there's going to be this side of ministry that is very difficult. Where two or more are gathered, there's bound to be a fight. It's just one of those things, and they don't, when you're in seminary, it's all rosy. You're going to go out and save the world, and it's all going to be wonderful and all that. But they don't talk about the personal attacks that you come under and all the stuff that happens in ministry that just happens. And in the early years, I took it personally and carried it for a long ways. I felt like I had failed or was not, up to snuff spiritually. But I can't control what goes on in people's minds. I can only do what I do, and not everybody will have the same experience or reaction to that. But if all of us start trying to pattern our lives, pattern the direction of our lives, in my case, my ministry, according to what I think everybody wants, why even show up? Why even try to do something like this? There's plenty of other places they can go to get what they want. And that's one of the great things about the internet and all the various options we have today. If you don't like it here, you'll like it over there maybe. But what I do find is if you're unhappy here, you'll probably be unhappy there. And that's the other aspect of forgiveness, is it's letting go of that energy that says, this place is not good enough. This experience is not good enough. Good enough for what? Is it preventing me from experiencing God? Or am I preventing me from experiencing God? That's the spiritual path. To answer that question, put it on myself, that's what this is all about. We don't have the power to control the rest of the world. And if we did, it would be probably a bigger mess than it is now. It's like Myrtle Fillmore said about the weather. Someday somebody's going to, we're going to be able to control the weather, but I sure feel sorry for the person who's in charge of it. Everybody has an opinion about what is right, what's good, what's wrong, what we all need to do to make this the world a better place. If you want to make this world a better place, practice forgiveness as we're talking about it here. Be willing to give up the negative energy that you hold on to. Somebody offends you in some way, understand that it's not the person you're dealing with. It's the energy in your consciousness. And that puts the ball in your court where it should be. There's no principle that says you must demonstrate your spiritual strength by placing yourself in the path of an oncoming train. It's much better to let it go by stepping off the tracks and letting the train pass. When I was growing up, we had a little dog. He was a mutt that wandered in, and I fell in love with him and kept him. But we would go walk on railroad tracks. We would actually go hunting on railroad tracks. And that dog, you'd hear the train come, and that dog would get right in the middle of the tracks and run straight at that train, barking like he was going to do something about this problem. And we would just scream at the top of our lungs. His name was Poochie. Poochie! Don't do that. Poochie didn't listen. He didn't care. Well, Poochie did that with a car one day, and Poochie is in Poochie heaven now. He just, unfortunately, would not listen. But he couldn't forgive those vehicles. So, what good would it do to put yourself in front of a person who has hurt you once and probably will do it again, and try to throw your arms around them and forgive them? We're talking about levels of consciousness. We're talking about capabilities, and we're not all at the same place. There are people who deal in harm. That's the way they get through life, is hurting others. And I've run across many of those in ministry. And it's never fun. But when that happens, do you run out the door, chase them down, and say, we need you here, we got to have you here? The old saying goes, whatever you have to do to get them back, you'll have to do to keep them. A pretty wise saying, I think. But it's about the energy that we put around them. And there is behavior in this world that we simply will not throw our arms around and say, this is fine. You know, somehow I'm so high in my consciousness that I am able to deal with this in a loving way. And sometimes you just get off the tracks. That's the best way, and let the train go by. If you're dealing with the question of forgiveness, try thinking of it as an act of leaving behind a bit of baggage that no longer serves your highest good. The simple shift in attitude could be the very change you're looking for. You don't have to do it. The question always that you ask yourself is, do I want the freedom this will give me? And if the answer is yes, then it has nothing to do with that person's behavior. It has everything to do with the choice you're making now to let that energy go. You may do it successfully for 5 minutes and then it comes back up. Do it again. But do it not from a personal level, but from an energy level, and it makes it a heck of a lot easier. And if you stumble on somebody, you're just angry, it's all get out about something somebody said, don't beat yourself up for that. Because you have them beating you up and then you're beating yourself up too. And two people beating up on you at the same time solves nothing. As quickly as you can, remember this. Just think of this as baggage, energy that you're letting go. All right? That's all we need to say about that. So we'll thank you for coming out, and we'll see you again next week.